One of the great challenges I have in doing this is that I am not an accomplished speaker or trained speaker by any stretch. And as I prepare these things, these mashed together thoughts and plans, a great difficulty is time management. And I can tell you that to flip through all this at home takes a little bit of time. But fear not, experience is that if it's 30 minutes on paper, it's 12 in here. So hopefully that will be the case today. I would tell you that 2 weeks ago, Sam approached me right there and said, "You are going to be here on the 28th, right?" And I said, yeah. We had talked about it some weeks or a couple of months earlier, but he'd never quite sealed the contract there. But I told him, of course, and I sat down on my pew right there, and I opened my little notebook, and I turned to where I had put a couple of notes, and just some things that were on my mind and my heart, and I figured would be something I would talk about up here to you guys today. Then Sam began to preach and proceeded to cover every one of those little points I had in my book. So much for plan A. I needed to work on plan B. So I went to work on another passage that I had been reading and rereading for 2 or 3 weeks. Just couldn't seem to get past it. From 1 John chapter 3. And that's not what's in the bulletin. But let me just read that for you real quickly. It says, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the children of God." And the part I love, and so we are. It's a wonderful passage and very special because coincidentally it was the passage preached at our little Lucy's baptism, according to the notes in my Bible, on September 12th of 2021. And Mama can fact check that for me. Make sure I didn't mess that up. But John goes on to write there, "The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure." So here's this word hope punctuating this passage. And I'll tell you that those notes that I scribbled from plan A that I mentioned above were on hope. And in those notes, there's not much more there than a title, and it was the title you see today in the bulletin, "Our Great and Many Hopes." I had this fascination with this word hope, seeing it everywhere I turn. And so, yeah, I seem to be bound to this word, so in spite of Sam handling it very well a couple of weeks ago, I want to give it a try. So hope is my subject today. I invite you to turn in your Bibles to Hebrews 6, and I'm going to start reading in verse 10, if you'd like to follow along. It's a really wonderful passage, one that contains so much. It's beyond my understanding, but I'm going to try to work through the thoughts that I have on it. Beginning in verse 10, "For God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and love that you have shown for his name in serving the saints, as you still do. And we desire each one of you to show the same earnestness, to have the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, 'Surely I will bless you and multiply you.' And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes an oath is final for confirmation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. I would just tell you, there is a lot of stuff in here, and I'll unpack just a little bit as my mind can conceive and understand, but a lot going on in here. So this thing, hope, has been on my mind, like I kind of alluded to. And, well, in my work every day, I have gotten from spending so much time doing basic accounting to more administrative things, and I do a lot of writing. Now, most of it is in emails. More and more seems to be in text messages, even rarely on paper with a ink signature. You remember how we used to do that in the old days. But I became aware some time ago that I overuse this word hope. In examples would be if I'm answering a question or addressing a condition or a problem, I'll put my argument or my answer, my response, and then right below it, I hope this resolves the matter. I hope you understand the issue. I hope this solution works. And I've just become painfully aware that I do this really often. And I think if anybody looked and said, the guy always says hope and everything he writes to me. And then to top it off, it's not unusual most any morning at 7 a.m., standing in front of the sink, brushing my teeth or something, my phone goes off and I look and it's, hey, I'm sorry I'm not going to be in today. I'm not feeling very good. So my response most typically is, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you feel better soon. If the same person texts me again tomorrow, I want to write the same thing. I don't know what else to put. It just makes sense. And it's sincere. I want that, obviously, for them. Just like in my email, in my writings, I hope this resolves the matter. I don't have to address it again and again. So, but I think I'm missing something here. I think this word hope is not only overused, but I'm not sure I get it truly. Now, at the same time, I'm seeing this word hope in my Bible reading. In my devotions, it seems every passage I pick up and read has got hope nailed to it somewhere. And it's things like this: hope of eternal life, hope of righteousness, hope of glory, hope of salvation, hope of the gospel, or the God of hope, a living hope, the hope laid up for you in heaven. I hope this sticks in your head and you start to see this stuff too. But what does it mean? What does this hope mean? Well, the typical use of the word for me in the business setting and just normal conversation, it's more of a wish, right? It's something that I wish or desire that would take place. Again, it's usually sincere, but, often it's wishful thinking. And if you think about it, it carries a certain degree of doubt. Sure, I hope this resolves the problem that we're having, but chances are it won't, and I will have to work on it some more. The best example of this I can come up with is very clear. If you didn't know, the Georgia lottery is up to $1.5 billion or so. I'm not a lottery guy, but you see it on the billboards. So we can buy a ticket and be hopeful we win, right? What a great thing to win. But how realistic is it when you read that the odds are 1 in 292 million? So how strong is your hope that you're going to win this thing? And we're persistent too, because 1 in 292 million today, we didn't make it. Guess what? We might show up tomorrow and buy another one. So we're hopeful in this. The biblical use apparently is a little bit different. I think when we talk about hope, one of the first verses that comes to mind for me is in 1 Corinthians 13. It says, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. And we hear a lot about love, and we hear a lot about faith, not so much about hope. So what is this hope? Well, maybe it's a sort of a pointer to stability or assurance, maybe a confident expectation. A little more flowery term is that which anchors the soul in the midst of life's trials. So we're very conscious, I think, of this word hope, both in the worldly, normal setting and then in the biblical setting. But admittedly, this passage in Hebrews is hard for me, and I go to commentaries looking for some help. One in particular stood out to me, a sermon by a guy, a 19th century preacher named Alexander Maclaren. And he made some very good points, and I'm borrowing quite heavily from him today. But let me just read a quote. And again, this is 19th century, some longer words and a little language we're not typically using. But he writes, "There's something very remarkable in the prominence given by Christianity to hope as an element in the perfect character. The New Testament is, one may say, full of exhortations to hope perfectly. It is regarded as one of the three virtues which sum up all Christian goodness: faith, hope, and love. In one place, the Apostle Paul lays upon it the whole weight of our salvation, for he says, we're saved by hope." Now that's a reference to a passage in Romans 8, where Paul writes, we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. That's pretty strong, isn't it? There's a lot of significance to this word hope. Maclaren goes on to say that this great prominence given to the exercise of hope seems clearly to be by God's own design in our nature. He says, man is a creature obstinate or stubborn in his hope. And as stubborn as we are in our hopes, many of our worldly hopes just never quite pan out. Yet we continue. We set our sights on one hope after another. They may or may not work out, but it doesn't seem to deter us from continuing to press on with one hope after the other. So I think it is easy for us to see that hope is truly pervasive in our character. It's part of our makeup, and it is truly a powerful part of our character and our design. We are pretty clearly stubbornly hopeful. Well, I think Maclaren offers a wonderful insight here in the purposeness and the design of hope in our character when he goes on, and this is an old proverb he quotes from somewhere, and I'll try to unpack it for us because I had a hard time catching on. I'm a little slow. Maclaren says, God never sends mouths, but he sends meat to feed them. God never sends mouths, but he sends meat to feed them. And if there be in man a faculty so obstinate, stubborn, and strong as this, there must be somewhere a reality which it can grasp. And grasping can be freed from all its miseries and mistakes. So this proverb, I relate it to the sending of the people, the freed Israel into the desert. Some millions of people were told the clothes on their back, the trinkets they could get from the Egyptians. But how many days will that sustain them? So these empty mouths went purposely by design, by God's plan, into the desert, and they start complaining they're hungry. God knew, God provided manna, water, quail. So God never sends mouths, he sends meat to feed them. So, but what about this statement? Excuse me. If there be in a man a faculty, a trait, or characteristic so obstinate, stubborn, and strong as this, there must be somewhere reality which it can grasp, and grasping can be freed from its miseries and mistakes. Our earthly hopes are often about things that we want, wealth, wellness, joy, or peace. Now, the immediate object of that may be some trinket, something we think will satisfy our needs and make us feel better. but it's misguided, isn't it? It doesn't have its sights set on the true source of health and wellness and peace and joy. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So about two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us, a different hope, not a temporal hope. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. This passage, I think, opens up an understanding of hope, for me at least, and I hope for you. I wish for you. So we'll talk about this context, this anchor and this vessel. I think we can all easily picture in our minds a ship sitting on clear blue water, having a thin chain extending from one side or the other diagonally into the water and extending to the depths. This line or rope or chain is straight and tight because it's holding the ship against the currents or the winds, and it's firmly rooted in an anchor and an anchorage to hold the ship. So we'll consider these four simple things: the anchor, the anchorage, the resting place of the anchor, the chain, and the ship. The anchor. Well, verse 18 encourages us to hold fast to the hope set before us. I think clearly this refers us to an object that's fixed, something that's outside of ourselves. It's something that's offered to us because it's set before us. And in that way, this anchor of the ship is outside the ship. The anchor does no good in the ship. So we must be anchored to something outside. Without too much delay, it's clear and it's easy to see that this anchor is, of course, Jesus. This anchor that is given as sure and steadfast as outside of us, and we attach to it, is this Jesus. The verse continues by saying a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus is gone as a forerunner on our behalf. So Jesus is the anchor of our souls, but what does it mean that this hope has entered into the inner place behind the curtain? Well, our Nicene Creed, which we confess fairly often, describes Jesus as crucified, buried, and risen, ascended into heaven, and seated on the right hand of the Father. Christ resides at the throne of God. You may recall in the Old Temple, the ark and the mercy seat represented the throne and the place of God, and it resided in the holiest part, the Holy of Holies, and it was kept behind a veil and separated from the rest of the temple. Christ then, seated by God's throne, has gone beyond that veil to this throne room, this place where God's presence is. But as a forerunner, it means that Jesus entered God's presence on our behalf. It means that we, his sheep, his followers, will likewise follow him and live in the presence of God. This then is the anchor of our souls, that we who follow Christ will be like him, for we shall see him as he is, and will finally and eternally be delivered from our brief earthly existence, from all our troubles, into the presence of God, following our forerunner. He is sure and steadfast, fully adequate and sufficient to make it so. So in our worldly use of this word hope, we never fully realize these dreams of hope, this wishful thinking, but this biblical hope, as the quote is, the hath has not been told, eye has not seen, neither hath it entered into the heart of man in his loftiest anticipations, the transcendent realization of the things that God has prepared for them that love him. But even more, the awe of the great lengths to which God has gone in his love to accomplish this on our behalf. Here for me was the sweet spot in this study, the anchorage. What is the anchor grounded in? Where is it stuck fast to hold us steady? The ship's anchor must be well grounded or attached to something to hold the ship steady against the wind or current. What then is this thing that we lay hold of? McLaren poses this question. He says, why is it that I may, without presumption, and that I must, unless I would fall beneath my obligations, expect to be forever like Jesus Christ? How can we believers be so presumptuous and bold as to expect that we should be forever like Jesus? It's really a bold statement to presume and to assume and to that we in our earthly substance will be transformed and live and be like Jesus forever. And returning back to our passage, and this is going to flip back to some King James because I just like the way it flowed. It says, God willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things in which it was impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation or encouragement. Or to put in other words, God's solemn utterance of his will guaranteed to us by God's putting all the majesty of his own being into pawn for the fulfillment of his promise is the ground on which we rest. This is the anchorage. Nothing can touch it. It's tough for me to take in. So I'm going to try to relay it to you as best that I can. What does it mean, God's solemn utterance of his will guaranteed to us by God's putting all the majesty of his own being into pawn? Think about it. We're celebrating Christmas, where God himself set aside glory and majesty and power and dominion and was born in the most humble of means in a stable, poor, with nothing. He set aside it all this majesty and greatness and grandeur. What a tremendous thing that God did. And as far as putting into pawn as a fulfillment of his promise, we've heard of pawn shops. We understand the concept that you take something valuable to you because you need cash. You go to a pawn shop. The guy gives you 25% of what it's worth in cash dollars. It sits on the shelf. You go pay your bill, your debt. Then you save and hope to go back and purchase your item back at twice what he gave you for it. It's in pawn. If you don't redeem it, it's gone. It goes to somebody else. God put his majesty in pawn. Well, how did he do that? Think of the risk of being born as a human, fully God. We understand that as best that we can. Yet, one misstep, one wicked thought, one sinful desire on Christ's part, it's done. The experiment, if you call it a grand experiment, failed because Christ had to live a perfect, sinless life to redeem sinful man. So God did put it on the line, all on Christ's back and his shoulders to live a sinless life. That's big. That's really big and huge. So that is the anchorage. That is what this anchor of our hope is embedded in, that God would do that for us. How presumptuous of us to presume something like that, but yet how marvelous and wonderful of God to go to such lengths. And in McLaren's flowery tongue, I'll read this. If we cleave to Jesus Christ, we have anchored ourselves in the fastness of the divine nature. We have struck the roots of our hopes deep into the very being of God, and all that is majestic, all that is omnipotent, all that is tender, all that is immutable in him goes to confirm to my poor heart the astounding expectation that whatsoever Christ is, I shall become, and that wheresoever Christ is, there will also his servant be. Oh, this rock foundation on which we may build makes all the other foundations upon which men rest their ruinable hopes seem wretched and transitory. How simple, how base, how distorted when we use flippantly this word hope about the smallest of things in our lives. Well, let's move on. A little more quickly from here on out. Got to beat that 12-minute time limit. The cable, the anchor and the anchorage are of no use unless they're attached to the rope or a chain. All these benefits and all the grandeur of God's providence are off the board unless we attach ourselves to them and set our hopes there. What does this mean? Well, attachment to this great hope, this great anchorage, means detachment from lesser things. We must get away from these earthly hopes that we so easily and quickly invest ourselves in. We must train ourselves to see through and look beyond these smaller temporal things to the great weight of glory behind them. The exhortation here is that the habit of Christian hope needs diligent cultivation and strenuous effort. I think that there are a few things that Christian men and women need to be exhorted more earnestly than this, that they should not waste upon their time and their efforts meaningless hopes, and instead focus on that great hope of the most glorious and blessed realities in the future. So we're encouraged here to not let ourselves be so absorbed by the anticipations of what we're going to do and where we're going to go tomorrow that we have no time or leisure to think of what we're going to do and where we're going to go through the eternities. Let us be encouraged to live in continual contemplation, thoughts of the blessed future and him who makes it, and fasten them to the anchor of our souls, which have entered within the veil. And finally, the steadfastness of the ship that rides out the storm by being rightly anchored. This Christian hope, if we understand it and incorporate it, it must lead us to a steadfast and a calm and a patient nature, that peace that passes all understanding. Our duty cannot be too hard when we have great hope that action is for good. Our difficulties might dwindle and our hardships seem less when we look ahead to that great hope. It's not so hard to resist temptations when temptations have their dazzling light dimmed by greater brightness of the hope revealed. He that has anchored himself to Christ may be calm in sorrow and triumphant over temptation. And whatsoever winds may blow, he may ride safely there. Our hope will be the ally of all dignity and patience and victory. It will steady our soul and in some measure give it its own steadfastness and security. Well, this great hope. This title was Our Great and Many Hopes, and it started my thinking because of all these instances of the different sorts of hope. But I think this anchor of the soul is the great and the greatest. So if I've picked up anything or discovered anything in this study, it's a better understanding of this word hope, a more respectful appreciation of hope, and the difference between a worldly and an earthly hope, and which is not steadfast and true, and to focus my attention more and more on that hope that is steadfast and true and well-grounded. I think as I look back that the true meaning of this word hope has been pretty much stolen and taken from us in today's language. And I think that maybe we're tricked into thinking that hope is only wishful thinking and by definition full of uncertainty. That is not the Christian hope. We must, as believers, understand hope as the true assurance of the great and many promises of God. May we apply ourselves to detach from earthly and imperfect hopes, and with all diligence attach ourselves to the persistent hope in the sure and steadfast anchor of the soul.